Hello and welcome to this video on the poem Dulce Et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. As normal, we're assessing three things: the meaning of the poem, the language and structure, and of course the context, which includes knowledge of the poet. Dulce Et Decorum Est was written by Wilfred Owen, who set off to fight in the First World War. Like many soldiers, he was optimistic of what he'd find there. He was expecting to become a hero. He was expecting a place where he could make his name and go on an adventure in some foreign land. Unfortunately, when he got there, that wasn't quite what he saw. He became cynical of the reasons why the war was even taking place. He was now realistic of what war would actually be like. He became more and more angry as he felt betrayed by the government, as if the government had lied to him about the reasons they were there and what to expect.
Wilfred Owen enlisted in the British Army in 1915. He returned to England in 1917 because of shell shock. Owen started writing poetry about the war when he was in hospital. His poems are now famous, but they weren't at the time.
Second Lieutenant Wilfred Edward Salter Owen, Manchester Regiment, 24 years of age, soldier and poet. I came here to this hospital 3 months ago. They say I'm suffering from shell shock. In this war, men see such terrible things that sometimes our minds are damaged. And that's when they send us to places like this. I'm not the only poet here. The famous poet Siegfried Sassoon is also a patient. He's been really inspirational to me. Sassoon says that soldier poets should write about what they know. They should write about the war. He says it's our duty to write poems about what we've seen, to show people what war is really like. And that's what I'm trying to do in this poem. We'd been under enemy bombardment for 8 days. We hadn't slept for a week. And then we had to march 8 miles back in the mud and the freezing rain. I looked at the men. They were filthy, ill, exhausted. Some were so tired they couldn't see properly, and some had even fallen asleep as they marched. When they come to France just a few months before, they'd been strong, young men, and now they were old and broken. I want my readers to see those men.
Wilfred Owen speaking there as he lay in hospital recovering from shell shock. Some facts about him. War broke out in 1914 and Wilfred Owen joined the army the following year, aged 22. Before long though, he had to return to England to get treatment for shell shock, what today we'd call post-traumatic stress disorder, a severe anxiety brought on by a stressful situation. Owen returned to the trenches from choice a year later. He was determined to be a hero, determined to earn rewards. At least then he felt he could write about something in his poetry. He was also decorated for his courage in battle before being killed on the 4th of November 1918. Almost exactly a week before peace was declared and the war finally ended. His mother, in fact, received a letter telling her about his death on the day the bells rang out in London, signifying the end of the war. Dulce Et Decorum Est is the poem we're covering today, a tale of a brutal gas attack.
Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge. Till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot, all went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too paced behind the wagon that we flung him in and watched the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gurgling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. Dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.
A very disturbing poem there from Wilfred Owen, telling the reality of war and the situation he faced. Now let's look at the copy of the poem in a bit more detail. As you can see, I've already highlighted many of the links that link to death there in orange. The poem is filled with them, as you might expect. Knock-kneed, coughing like hags, haunting, distant rest, limped, bloodshot, lame, blind, drunk with fatigue, all reminding us of the ill health of these soldiers and how close they are to death. In the second stanza, a man in fire or lime, drowning, helpless, guttering, choking, drowning, repeated once more. And in the last stanza, smothering, white eyes writhing, blood come gargling, froth corrupted lungs. These soldiers are really suffering here. You can tell that they're virtually falling apart. Once again, this is not the reality of war that the government told Owen he was going to be seeing. The other clear sense we get from this poem is one of anger and one of frustration. We have words like cursed being used, implying the situation the soldiers are in and how they feel about this situation. We turned our backs, drunk with fatigue, just in time, as if they've only just escaped the horrors that are going on around them. Yelling out, maybe this poem is Owen yelling out to his audience, warning us about the reality of war. The third stanza is equally filled with these ideas of anger. Devils sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt, obscene, bitter, incurable sores, and then the word lie in capital letters at the end there, implying it's the government's lies that Wilfred Owen is fighting against here. Okay, let's take this poem apart then, piece by piece. Dulce Et Decorum Est, the title, means it is right and honourable. Heavy sense of irony there in terms of what's happening. It is right and honourable. Irony being used at this point then. This line is of course repeated at the end of the poem. The full version, of course. Dulce et decorum est pro patria more. It is right and honourable to die for your country. Again, the irony here as Owen is telling us how awful war is. He does this by first describing then the soldiers themselves, bent double like old beggars, implying that society has left these soldiers behind as if they're being reduced to homeless. Beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags. Now, when we think hags, we think female. So by using the word hags here, it's almost dehumanizing these soldiers. As well as demasculating them, it's taking away what made them what they perceive as being a hero. It is turning them into the feminine. Then we cursed, as if we are with these soldiers. We're fighting and walking alongside them through the sludge, till haunting. Obviously they're linking to death. Haunting flares, we turned our backs. Well, flares in wars are normally there to signify help or ask for help in some way. Yet the soldiers are turning their backs on this help. Maybe they don't believe that help can arrive. Maybe they don't think they can be saved. And towards our distant rest, an implied link to death there again, began to trudge. But what are they walking towards? Is it really rest, or is it in fact their own deaths, as if wherever they go, death is coming for them? Men marched asleep. Many lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. We get this repeated L sound here, lost, limped, making the word sound longer, perhaps implying how difficult this journey the soldiers are on actually is. Bloodshot, all went lame, this repetition of the L sound once again. All blind. What are they blinded to? Are they blind for the reasons why they fought in the first place? Are they blind to what's going on around them because they literally can't see anymore? So in my case, I might write blind. They don't understand why they're fighting. As we move forward then, we have these disappointed shells, as if the shells are personified. They're sad they haven't hit their targets and they're dropped behind. Then the tone of the poem massively changes. We suddenly get this interruption of action. Now, war, although we might think of it as being quite a violent place, actually most of the time you're sitting and waiting. And throughout this first stanza, we get this idea of just soldiers walking past. It's slow, it's very descriptive, but there's not much actual movement. Here, suddenly then, this is interrupted. The exclamation marks show this should be shouted as if it's paraphrasing the officers. Gas, gas, repeated. Quick, boys. Boys representing their innocence or youth of the soldiers. An ecstasy of fumbling. Ecstasy means extreme positive. They are really, really happy, yet they're simply happy just to survive. This isn't ecstasy, this is simply survival. Fitting clumsy helmets, implying these helmets don't really fit, they're not really suited to purpose, much like many of the equipment in the First World War. Just in time. We pause there with the semicolon, thinking these soldiers only just made it. But someone, name unknown, still was yelling out and stumbling. We've got this idea these heroic soldiers are only just able to move. Floundering like a man in fire or lime. Now lime's acidic and fire obviously is going to do a great deal of damage to these soldiers, as if they're literally dying or falling apart or burning in front of the speaker. We have to assume at this point the speaker is Owen himself. He's writing a first-hand account. dim through the misty panes and thick green light. Now we think light, we think hope. And green normally means positive, something that's going to be good in their lives. In this case, though, it's the gas. The gas that's going to kill them. We then have this green sea, this repeated word green, and this natural beauty being described here. But once again, it's the gas that's being described. I saw him drowning in all my dreams before my helpless sight. He plunges at me. The soldier's lunging at you. He wants to grip hold of you to save his life. Guttering, choking, drowning. This is called a tricolon. 3 different parts, all of which slightly worse than the last. At first, he's like spluttering and trying to survive. Then he can't breathe, so he's trying desperately to gag more air inside him. And finally, this soldier drowns. The repetition here of these 3 adjectives describing the soldier shows how badly in pain he is, and ultimately, the fact he can't survive. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace. As if this isn't just a situation that's happened once. These dreams are in fact nightmares that the soldiers have every night because they've had to go through this day after day after day. It's like their life force, their energy is being smothered by this reoccurring nightmare. Now we have this word here, you, this personal pronoun that puts us into the story, into the situation. So we're imagining ourselves now in this battlefield. You two could pace behind the wagon we flung him in. This dying soldier's being flung in the back of a wagon with lots of other soldiers, all dying due to the gas attack. This almost objectifies the soldiers. As soon as you're seen to be dead, you're flung into the wagon like an object. Then we have this really graphic description, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face. This W sound 3 times over, exaggerating the pain this soldier feels. White eyes writhing. They're squirming, they're moving in his face as if his eyes are alive, like some kind of monster or snake. Suggests, in fact, the soldier is evil or turning monstrous. Hanging face, another reference to death here. Hanging face, like a devil sick of sin. You could hear, now we've got senses appearing here, sights, then sounds. At every jolt, every movement this soldier made, the blood come gargling from froth-corrupted lungs. These nouns here that are supposed to save us and breathe us and keep us alive, in this case have been corrupted or ruined by the gas attack. Obscene as cancer, a well-known killer disease here. The simile, likening this gas attack to having cancer. Bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. Reminding us that these soldiers are innocent. They're young. They should have their lives ahead of them, but they don't because they're dying in this gas attack. Innocent tongues. This might also suggest then that if these soldiers could tell the truth about the war, they would. But they can't because they can't breathe and they can't live anymore. They're dying or already dead. Then we have this part here, my friend. This is ironic. Owen is writing to the people who sent these soldiers to war and is calling them friends. We know the message here, though, is one of anger and one of betrayal. You would not tell with such high zest. That means high energy, high enthusiasm. You would not tell with such high zest to children. These soldiers then once more likened to being young, innocent, to children, much like the boys up in stanza 2. Ardent for some desperate glory. The people at home want to go to war, and Owen is telling us that's wrong. We shouldn't be. We should be worried about going to war. We shouldn't want to fight. This idea of finding glory on the battlefield. This is made to sound hollow due to the description we have above. The old lie, Dulce Et Decorum Est, patria mori. Again, the capital letter there is it's the government who's lying. The basics of this poem then. Dulce Et Decorum Est. Who? A soldier watching his companions die from a gas attack in World War I. What? The speaker describes his fellow soldiers limping home after another gas attack. The soldiers are trying to save themselves by putting on gas masks, but one doesn't make it. He suffers agony and is soon thrown in the back of a cart with the other dead bodies. He's still moving when they do this. Why was it written? It is an angry, disheartening poem to teach us what war is really like. Once more, I'm going to give you 3 quotes with brainstorms down the outside. Please pause this video after each quote to make notes around each quote. And quote number 2. And quote number 3. Now, as you know, in writing about this poem, we use a 9-step plan to help you focus on exactly what you're being assessed for. The parts in red are the key parts to pass the test. The bits in black are those that you might want to add in. It's not really much of a problem doing it in a different order, but these are kind of the key ingredients to get a good grade out of this test. Here's an essay example, written on the top of the board there with my 1 to 9 steps highlighted down the side. How does Wilfred Owen present the theme of war? I start with a short introduction, overall, and then explaining what Wilfred Owen is saying in his poem. Then, as you can see, I start with talking about the beginning of the poem, from the outset. I mention Owen, the poet, and I explain what he's doing just at the beginning of the poem. I then add some context as number 2. I then use a list of words that all have something in common, in this case indicating how poor and injured the soldiers are. I then choose a longer quote, deliberately with enjambment in it, that's what these dashes are here, so I can look at the enjambment as a structural feature later. I then explain why I chose that quote, why out of the 10, 15 lines I could have chosen, why did I go for this particular line or pair of lines. I then zoom in on an individual word, in this case the word haunting, and explain why I think the author chose that particular word to use. I then look at the enjambment from the line I've chosen, the tone that Owen seems to be using, and lastly, what we as readers seem to think about when we think about that particular line. In this case, the reality of war. If I put all that together, that's how the paragraph would look. And I then go on to look at the middle of the poem, as the poem develops, Owen forces us to, and then I look at the end of the poem. By the conclusion of the poem, Owen wants us to think about. The same structure would be applied for each part, so I'd start with introduction, then 1 to 9 from the beginning of the poem, 1 to 9 from the middle of the poem, and 1 to 9 from the end of the poem. I could shorten that a little bit if I was worried about time. Thank you very much.